from your 24-hour news and election source, KCRG TV 9. This is a 2,000-vote special. The Iowa Caucuses, your voice, your choice. Brought to you by TV 9 and Kirkwood Community College.
Hello, everyone. I'm TV 9's Bruce Zowney. Thank you for joining us. This is a presidential election year, and once again, we here in Iowa have the privilege of beginning that presidential selection process. We do it through caucuses. You've probably heard of them, but unless you've taken part in previous caucuses, you may have no idea what this strange-sounding word really means. And that's why we're here tonight. We're going to take you inside the Iowa caucuses and show you how they work. You will see why these caucuses are important to you, to our state, and to our country. We've teamed up with Kirkwood Community College to bring you this nonpartisan look at the Iowa caucuses. We hope you learn that your participation is the most important part of this political system. First of all, what is a caucus? Well, the dictionary says it's a meeting of a political party to decide upon policy and to choose candidates for office. That sounds pretty formal. But the Iowa caucuses are actually a rather informal beginning to the national election process. It all begins with the campaigning, when we Iowans can see and meet candidates face-to-face during the months before the caucuses. Then, on caucus night, we tell the nation what we think of those candidates and the issues at hand. Your chance to voice your opinion is just a few days away. At 7 o'clock Monday night, January 24th, the Iowa caucuses begin in local precincts all across the state. All you have to do is to go to your precinct location and take part. So what happens there? Well, if you've never been to a caucus before, here's what it's all about. On caucus night, the entire nation will be watching us. The first in the nation Iowa caucuses are the first real test for the candidates after months of campaigning. But as Professor Bill Rosberg points out, there's more to a caucus than just choosing presidential candidates.
It's also the first step in the process of deciding what exactly it is that we want our party to stand for. And every year, every 2 years anyway, when we hold caucus sessions, the key is very, very frequently that argument about what the party stands for, not the question as to who our candidate is going to be.
Sure, most of you came because C-SPAN...
This discussion of issues is what brings Iowans together. A caucus is very similar to a town meeting. People come together to share their opinions and find common ground. And finding that common ground is what makes the caucus such an informal, interactive discussion.
It's a formal process, but it's frequently a fairly informal application of it. I mean, there's nobody pounding them on the head or anything like that. So it's a neighborhood meeting. It's a throwback to the old days in this country. And I'm not much of a historian, but I know people used to do their politicking or take their politicking more seriously than they do now. And it was important to them. I think maybe it was an entertainment to them. They didn't have TV or something, so they'd talk politics.
Ken Sullivan is senior editor for the Gazette. He's reported on Iowa politics for more than 20 years. And Ken has seen how decisions we make here in Iowa affect the national political process.
I think what comes out of the caucus is less important than what goes in, and it speaks to the opportunities for the people here to meet candidates. And it speaks especially, I think, of the necessity for candidates to confront real people with real ideas.
Count the number of members within each group. So in Group A, we're going to go with 50.
So how does a caucus work? Well, it begins at the most local level in a precinct in your neighborhood. Caucus goers will fill more than 2,000 precinct locations on January 24th. The Democratic and Republican parties in Iowa conduct separate caucuses on the same night. Both parties begin the evening by electing a chairperson. But from then on, the caucuses are different for each party. As the Iowa Democratic Party caucus director, Melanie Cloud trains party members to run a caucus. She says caucus night is very important to her party.
It's the one night we have this 1 hour, 2 hours that we get to hang on to all these Democrats and explain to them why it's so important to stay involved in the party.
You're looking for?
Bill Vernon is organizing the Iowa Republican Party caucuses. He believes the caucuses are a chance for people to take control of government.
It's an empowering process, and it's a delegation process of sorts. Empowering in the sense that the neighborhood people get together, they figure out how they want to be governed, and what are their rights and duties, and what they want to live by. It's a delegation process in terms of passing off or electing representatives to represent the larger group at the county convention, at the district convention, at the state convention, and then again at the national convention where the presidential candidate is elected.
Before choosing delegates, each caucus must split and choose a preferred candidate. The Republican caucuses conduct a secret straw poll, but the Democrats physically separate into preference groups.
On caucus night, the caucus chair will actually say, everyone that is here to support Vice President Gore, move over to this side of the room. Everyone that's here to support Senator Bradley, move to this side of the room. Everyone that's uncommitted, move to this side of the room. And the people will actually get up and walk to the group that they support, and that's how they will apportion the delegates. They'll do the math, figure out how many delegates will go to each group, and that is what is reported on caucus night. Those are the numbers.
Those numbers are also plugged into a formula to decide how many delegates or people will attend the next step in the caucus process. For example, a winning candidate will receive more delegates to a county convention than a candidate with fewer votes. A Democratic candidate needs at least 15% of the caucus to be eligible to win delegates. On the other hand, the Republican straw poll is similar to an election. Each caucus goer receives a ballot.
And then you elect or indicate your preference toward a presidential candidate. After that vote is taken, it's called into a central location in Iowa and then disseminated out throughout the news service.
The next step in the caucus process is the county convention. Caucus goers choose delegates to represent each precinct at the county conventions in March, and that process continues to the district and state conventions. The National Democratic and Republican conventions are the final step in the caucus process before the election in November. Along the way, the field of candidates narrows to two choices, a Republican and a Democrat. As you can see, it all begins with one person who makes one choice at one precinct in Iowa. During the rest of the precinct caucuses, each party proposes, discusses, and votes on issues and policies called resolutions.
And then finally, it's a discussion of the issues, what's important and how we want to be governed, what are the rules and duties that we as Republicans want to live by.
The same is true for the Democratic Party. These resolutions also pass through the caucus process to each convention. As the resolutions move through the system, they are developed and become party platforms. But they all began with those small discussions in neighborhoods all across Iowa.
If you haven't been to a caucus, it's a very exciting event in the sense that you're a participant. It's an interactive process, and you have an opportunity to set the direction as to what will come. And at the end of the caucuses, after the presidential preferences are indicated and you're voted upon, Iowa, then once that's disseminated in the press, will be in effect sending a message to the rest of the country of what's important in Iowa.
Now, every 2 years, Iowans gather for caucuses. This year, we're choosing presidential candidates, but in 2002, the focus will center around the Iowa governor's race. Coming up, you will learn the valuable lessons Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan learned from the Iowa caucuses. And speaking of lessons, we'll give you an interesting history lesson about the caucuses and show why they're so important to you. Stay with us. Welcome back. Well, now that we've explained how the Iowa caucuses work, let's talk about how important they are. Most states choose presidential candidates with primary elections. Voters go to the polls and cast ballots. Primaries are faster than caucuses, and more people usually take part. But a caucus gives people a chance to become more involved in the political process by deciding who wins, who loses, and which issues are important. In 1976, a Georgia peanut farmer came to Iowa to campaign for president. Jimmy Carter was an unknown candidate then, but he took advantage of the Iowa caucuses to build his reputation and popularity.
Jimmy Carter came out of nowhere, literally. He spent an awful lot of time in Iowa. He effectively developed a reputation as trustworthy, believable, and he came out of Iowa so very, very strong that he couldn't be stopped. Now, this is the sort of thing that makes virtually every candidate in both parties consider the Iowa caucus important. You can't afford not to look good.
Jimmy Carter went on to win the 1976 presidential election, and he served one term. In 1980, he was defeated by a man who actually lost the Iowa caucuses. Ronald Reagan had learned from his experience in Iowa.
When Ronald Reagan first ran for the presidency, he did not do particularly well in the Iowa caucus. He got beat, okay? And as a direct result of his getting defeated in the Iowa caucus, he changed his focus, he changed his direction, and he concentrated on many of the issues that had led to his defeat here in Iowa. We learn as much by losing as we do by winning.
Because the Iowa caucuses are first in the nation, they really set the tone for the rest of the campaign. This first test of the political waters makes Iowa a very important state to win.
There are a couple of reasons that the caucuses are extremely important. The obvious one, they're first. And because they're first, there's a tremendous amount of interest in how members of the public who aren't professional politicians are going to actually vote, actually speak up, actually support given political candidates. And the fact that this is the first test beyond party regulars, so to speak, makes the caucus very, very important. The second one, I think, is in the nature of what goes on as a result of this contest. By 2 months from now, we're going to have narrowed the field, and there are going to be large numbers of primaries, large numbers of caucuses. A candidate's going to have to go in with a set speech. Everything's going to have to be locked in pretty well. Right now, probably the best way of looking at it is that each of the candidates and each of the parties is looking for voters retail rather than wholesale.
As we move closer to the November election, candidates must cover a lot more ground in a lot less time. They no longer really have the luxury of sitting down and talking with people one-on-one. That luxury only occurs here in Iowa. So how did Iowa become the host to the first in the nation caucuses? Well, there are as many theories as there are precincts in Iowa. Caucus supporters say Iowa represents the average national population. Therefore, we vote as proportionately as the rest of the country. Others believe it's because we're the most politically aware state in the Union. And still others believe it's just because we couldn't afford computers 30 years ago.
Well, I've heard many, many different explanations as to why we were first in the nation. My favorite, whether it's completely accurate or not, has to do with poverty. The Democratic Party in Iowa didn't have an awful lot of money. And as a result, they were very, very slow to computerize. Most of the rest of the nation's political apparatus was computerized before the Iowa Democratic Party was. As a direct result, it took more time to hand tabulate and to determine who delegates were going to the county level and beyond. And because of this, the Democrats found themselves in a position that they had to schedule their caucus early. So poverty effectively ends up pushing our caucus sessions back to very early in the season for the Democratic Party. The Republicans turned around and followed suit a little bit later.
Well, no matter how it happened, we shouldn't take Iowa's first in the nation status lightly. These face-to-face meetings with presidential candidates are an experience few other states can enjoy.
If you don't have the caucuses, if you don't have the preliminaries in a place where there is a face-to-face opportunity between the candidates and the people, the entire campaign, unfortunately, is going to be waged via the media. They're going to be investing heavily, as they are anyhow, in television commercial time, newspaper, radio, which is fine, but it doesn't provide real insight into the character or the ideas of the candidates.
This is where the caucus experience for Iowa is so very important. It's not just that we're first, but we're literally setting a major part of what's going to be the political agenda for this year.
But some say we're at risk of losing our first-in-the-nation status. Poor attendance and Iowa's lack of diversity may give other states a chance to take it away.
Iowa is at a major risk of losing the caucuses. The entire nation does not understand why Iowa is the big question around every other state. Why Iowa? Why does Iowa get to have this much power in the presidential nominating process? And my response is, why not Iowa? But Iowans need to know that if we lose this, we are not going to see any presidential candidates walk through the state and do any campaigning. Iowa issues are not going to become issues of national attention. Farming issues would not be issues of national attention. Lots of Iowa issues would not be even talked about nationally if it weren't for the Iowa caucuses. And this is, if we don't have the turnout that we are expecting on caucus night, we are at a major risk of losing the Iowa caucuses.
I was born and raised in Iowa, and I think everybody has a sense of responsibility and recognize and realize that this is an important process. And so I think that the caucuses will always be there for those people to exercise that responsibility.
So will the Iowa caucuses always be first in the nation? That's really up to you. We need a better attendance for this to continue. To take part in the Iowa caucuses on Monday, January 24th, you must be 18 years old by Election Day, and you must be a registered member of the Democratic or Republican parties. If you're not registered with either party, you can do that at the door on caucus night. And if you'd like, you can change your registration back after the caucuses are over. All you need to do then is complete the voter registration form in your phone book or stop by your county auditor's office to fill it out. Still to come tonight.
It's just a reality test that politics has to do with people.
For the people, by the people, of the people. The Iowa caucuses continue an American tradition. We'll show you how you can be part of history next. Welcome back. Do you remember voting for the first time? Was it exciting? Was it frightening? Well, as we grow older, we tend to take things like voting for granted, and the same goes for the Iowa caucuses. On Monday, January 24th, you have the chance to make history. You have the chance to let the rest of the country know how you feel about important issues and who you want to be the next president of the United States. If you've never participated before, here's how you can become involved in the Iowa caucuses.
I think anybody who misses going to a caucus has missed something essential about Iowa.
It's a learning experience every time.
This is an opportunity for Iowans to get up off their couch the evening of January 24th, go to their caucus site, and participate in a very lively, very energetic, grassroots type of political process.
Imagine being in a room full of Iowans who are making decisions about the future of our country. That can be a very exciting experience, especially for 19-year-old Holly Eggleston. This will be her first caucus.
Oh, okay. Well, you're going to be voting in Prairie Middle School. You know where that is, right down there. So it's like...
She says her interest in politics began when she was very young.
My parents have passed their philosophy that voting is important on to me. I remember asking my dad when I was a kid if he had voted, because they used to pass out buttons and stickers, and I used to take them from him, and I used to want to vote. And then I'd ask him where his button or his sticker was,
Iowans of all ages can participate in the caucuses. Even veteran voters enjoy the excitement of the caucus experience.
It was so exciting. There were so many candidates around, and I met many of them before the caucus. And I was just, riding high. It's so wonderful to be in Iowa and meet all these candidates.
The opportunity to make a difference is far greater within the caucus setting than anywhere else. And it's democracy in action to an extent that you can rarely see anywhere in the world except here in Iowa.
Whether you're a teenager, a retiree, or in between, the Iowa caucuses are open to everyone. This 2-hour process is your chance to see our political system in action. To find the caucus location nearest you, just log on to kcrg.com. There you'll find a list of caucus locations in eastern Iowa, or you can call the county auditor's office in your area for the information. So now you know everything there is to know about the Iowa caucuses. But if you're like a lot of people, you may still have a lot of questions. Well, coming up next, we'll give you some answers, so stay with us. Welcome back. Even though the Iowa caucuses have been around longer than Iowa has been a state, a lot of people have a lot of questions about the caucus experience. So we asked an expert, Steve Oval, Executive Director of Governmental Relations at Kirkwood Community College, to answer some of the most frequently asked questions about the caucuses. And we begin with simply, what is a caucus?
Well, a caucus by definition is a gathering of members of a political party to either select representatives to a convention or to express their preference for a particular candidate. In the case of the Iowa First in the Nation caucuses, it's truly a grassroots opportunity for registered voters to express their preference for the presidential candidate of their choice.
Another frequently asked question about the caucuses concerns the history of the caucuses.
Well, the Iowa caucuses are really democracy in action, very much of a grassroots type of process that really dates back to the early 1800s, even prior to our state being actually formed in 1846. The framers of the Iowa Constitution, I think, felt so comfortable with the concept of a grassroots town meeting type of format that when they framed the Iowa Constitution, they decided to leave the caucus format in place as opposed to putting a primary type of system in place. Over the years, the process has really gained increasingly more and more national attention, and more presidential candidates have discovered that the Iowa First in the Nation caucus system has really provided them a wonderful launching point for their campaigns, and in many cases can make or break a campaign. That's certainly been the case in some of the caucus history in Iowa over the last 20 years, where relatively unknown candidates have surfaced and gone on to win the presidency, and sometimes front runners really lost their lead as a result of what happened in the Iowa caucuses.
Another question a lot of people ask is who can participate in the caucuses?
The Iowa caucuses are open to any registered Iowa voter. Any voter that will be 18 years of age by November 7th of the year 2000 will be eligible to participate and be a voting member. Certainly other family members who have an interest in coming and participating and actually kind of enjoying the ambiance of the caucus are certainly welcome to do so. They just won't be able to participate. An individual must be a registered Democrat or Republican in order to attend their party's caucus and their caucus site. However, an individual that might currently be registered as an independent voter can change their registration at the door to either a Democrat or Republican, and an individual that would want to change their registration can certainly do so at the door if they chose to attend one of the other caucuses that they're not actually registered for.
Finally, another frequently asked question is, how do the caucuses work?
Well, the caucuses will begin at 7 p.m. on Monday evening, January 24th. Individuals will go to their designated caucus site in their precinct. The polling, the presidential polling, will probably take place fairly early in the evening because the national media certainly is very desirous of those results and wanting to get that known across the country. There'll be other activities that will occur at the caucus dealing with other issues as well. I think it's very important to point out that it's at that level and at that evening that representatives to the county convention will also be selected, representing on a proportionate basis the level of support that a particular presidential candidate received. And that's really the start of the process, going to the county convention, onward to the state convention, and ultimately the national convention, in which the actual representative of the two respective parties will actually be selected.
Despite all the national attention our state receives every 4 years, Despite all the media hoopla and despite the real importance of this grassroots political process, the Iowa caucuses have never really been that popular here in Iowa. Turnout is always very low and usually involves the political junkies, the diehard veterans, and a low number of party regulars who do understand what this simple procedure really means to our country. And because of that overall lack of interest, Iowa is in danger of losing its first-in-the-nation status when the next presidential selection process comes around. 4 years from now, we may no longer have this unique opportunity to set the political tone for America. If our caucuses lose their importance, we also lose the campaign settings that give any person in Iowa the chance to talk face-to-face with the candidates, to talk directly with someone who could be the next President of the United States. But you can help prevent that. All you have to do is find out where your political party, Republican or Democrat, is holding its caucus in your voting precinct, and then attend. You don't have to be an expert on the issues. You don't even have to be backing any particular candidate yet. Just give an hour or two of your time on Monday evening, January 24th, and take part in your local caucus. We here in Iowa have the privilege of beginning the process of selecting our next president. That's extremely important to our state, and it's even more important to our country. So let's make this opportunity count. I'm Bruce Downey. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.